Part 1. The unthinkable diagnosis. The hospital room was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. The hum of the medical equipment was a constant presence, and the quiet sound of the ventilator's rhythm was all that filled the air, aside from the soft, almost imperceptible whispers of the nurses outside. The soft, sterile scent of antiseptic mingled with the harsh reality that the mother could no longer ignore. The world outside this room was a blur. Time moved at an excruciatingly slow pace. It was as if the clock had forgotten to tick, each second dragging longer than the last. She sat beside her child's bed, her hands tightly gripping the small, fragile hand of her little girl, whose chest was rising and falling in a way that felt too unnatural. Her daughter, the child she had watched grow with such joy, was now lying unconscious, pale and frail. Her once vibrant energy was replaced by the coldness of the hospital room, where the child was connected to machines that hummed and beeped, keeping her alive in a way that felt foreign to the mother. The doctor's voice echoed in her ears, a constant reminder of the harsh reality she was now facing. She had replayed those words over and over in her mind, as if trying to make sense of them. But no matter how many times she heard them, they still made no sense. Your child is very sick. The illness is severe, and we need to begin treatment immediately. We don't have much time. Those words had shattered her world. We don't have much time. How could she process that? How could she reconcile the child she knew with the idea that she might lose her? How could she face a future without her? Her eyes flicked back to her daughter, lying there so still, so silent. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her child. Not to their family. The air felt heavy, pressing down on her chest as her heart beat erratically. She could feel a lump in her throat, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. She had to be strong. She had to keep it together. For her child. For her family. But how could she be strong when all she wanted to do was break down? How could she face something so cruel, something so unfair, when all she had ever done was love her child unconditionally? It was a moment she would never forget, a moment that seemed to stretch out forever, and yet, in the midst of it, she had heard that faint whisper inside her. A whisper of hope, of faith. She had heard people talk about the power of prayer in times of crisis. She had always believed in it. But now, she wasn't sure. How could prayer save her child when everything seemed so hopeless? She felt completely and utterly powerless. There she was, a mother who had always prided herself on being strong, on being able to fix any problem, on being able to make everything better. But now, sitting in this hospital room, her hands holding the hand of her sick child, she felt like nothing. She couldn't fix this. There was no magic cure, no quick solution. There was nothing she could do except wait and pray. But pray for what? What was she praying for? For her daughter to be healed? For the illness to disappear? For God to intervene? She had no idea. The only thing she knew was that she needed something to hold on to, something to believe in. She needed a miracle. The tears came at last, flowing down her face in silent streams. The weight of the situation, the fear of losing her child, the overwhelming sense of helplessness all came crashing down at once. She could barely breathe, her chest tightening as her breath hitched in her throat. She had always been able to protect her child, to keep her safe from harm, but now, the harm was something that no amount of love or care could prevent. She looked at her daughter again, her heart breaking at the sight of her. Her little girl, who had once run to her with open arms, laughing and full of life, was now lying still, her small body racked with illness. The once bright spark in her eyes was dimmed, and all the mother could do was watch as the machines kept her child breathing. The wires and tubes surrounding her daughter felt like chains that held her hostage, preventing her from moving, from growing, from being the person she was meant to be. And in that moment, the mother realized just how deeply her love for her child went. It wasn't just a love that protected or nurtured. It was a love that wanted to give everything it had for the child's well-being. The depth of that love was so powerful that it was nearly suffocating. But there was nothing more she could do. The doctors had done everything they could, but they couldn't promise anything. They couldn't guarantee her child would recover. They couldn't promise her that the treatment would work, and they certainly couldn't promise that she would ever hear her child's laughter again. The future seemed so uncertain, so fleeting, and the weight of that uncertainty was enough to crush her spirit. But amidst the overwhelming fear and despair, she remembered something. A prayer she had once said in times of trouble, a prayer that had comforted her in her darkest hours. It was a simple prayer, but it held immense power. God, please help me. Please help my child. She whispered those words now, though they felt like a fragile plea in the silence of the hospital room. She didn't know if God would answer. She didn't know if the prayer would make a difference. But she had to believe. She had to believe that something greater than herself was out there, watching over her and her child. She felt the weight of her fear, but she also felt something else, a faint stir of hope. It wasn't much, but it was there, like a flicker in the darkness. And for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her child could recover. Maybe God could hear her. The mother looked at her child, her heart swelling with love, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of peace. It was a peace that came from surrender, from letting go of the need to control everything, and from trusting in a higher power. It was a peace that filled her with hope, even in the face of the unknown. She whispered again, this time with more conviction, God, please save my child. Please. Part 2. A journey of faith begins. The room felt as though it had grown colder since the doctor's visit, as if the air itself had taken on the weight of the diagnosis. The steady beeping of the machines was the only sound filling the silence that had settled over the room. Outside the hospital window, the world was going on, moving forward without a care for the turmoil unfolding inside these sterile walls. But inside, the mother sat motionless, her hands still clasping the frail hand of her child, whose life now hung in the balance. She had heard the doctors talk about treatment options, but there were no promises. There were no assurances that her daughter would get better, no certainty that the medications would work. In that moment, the cold, clinical nature of the hospital felt more like a prison than a place of healing. There was no magic cure here, no instant solution to the terrifying problem before her. Only questions, fear, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The truth was, she didn't know what to do. She didn't know where to turn. The thought of losing her child, of never hearing her laughter again, of never seeing her run through the house with joy, was too much to bear. The pain was visceral, sharp, and unbearable. The emotional weight of it pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe, to think, to do anything but sit and wait. Yet, amidst the crushing weight of despair, something began to stir deep within her. Something she had long pushed aside in her rush to fix everything. Faith. It was a simple word, but in this moment, it felt like a lifeline, something she could grab hold of when everything else felt like it was slipping away. She remembered the moments when she had prayed before, prayers of gratitude, prayers of thanks, but never one of desperation like this. How could God hear her cry in the midst of so many others? How could He possibly answer when there was so much pain in the world? But deep down, she knew that there was nothing left to lose. All the doctor's knowledge, all the treatments they had tried, had not worked. The only thing left was her faith. With trembling hands, she closed her eyes. Her mind raced with the pain and fear she felt, but she focused on one simple thought. Please, God, help me. Help my child. She had no other words, no other way to express the desperate plea that welled up within her. The pain of watching her child suffer had broken something inside her, and now, all she could do was cry out for help. Her breath caught in her throat as she whispered the words again, this time with more conviction. God, please save her. Please help us. I can't do this without you. The mother felt something stir within her, something soft and comforting. It was a gentle warmth that seemed to spread through her chest, easing the tightness in her heart. She had no way of explaining it. But in that moment, as she sat in the sterile silence of the hospital room, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. It was as though a weight had been lifted, though the situation had not changed. Her child was still critically ill, the machine still beeped steadily, and the reality of the diagnosis was still there. But in that quiet moment of prayer, she felt a flicker of hope. The flicker of hope didn't make the pain go away, but it was enough to keep her going. For the first time since the diagnosis, she didn't feel completely alone. She was still scared, still uncertain, but she could feel God's presence with her. It was a quiet reassurance, a sense that no matter what happened, she wasn't walking this road alone. She continued to pray, each time with more faith, each time with more trust that God was listening. Please, God, I need your strength. I need your help. I need your love. The words were simple, but they came from the deepest part of her soul. She wasn't just asking for healing for her child. She was asking for the strength to endure whatever was to come. She needed the strength to stay strong for her child, to stay grounded in the face of such overwhelming fear. Every day, she prayed. She prayed as she sat beside her child's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. She prayed when she felt herself slipping into despair, when the fear and doubt threatened to overwhelm her. She prayed when the doctors gave her little hope, and when the nurses whispered about the gravity of the situation. Each prayer was like a lifeline thrown out into the dark, hoping that somewhere, somehow, God would hear her. And each day, as she continued to pray, she began to notice something. The heaviness in her heart started to lift, bit by bit. It wasn't a sudden miracle, but it was something. It was the smallest spark of hope, like the first light of dawn peeking over the horizon, offering promise of something better. One day, after a particularly long prayer, something shifted. The child's vitals began to stabilize, just a little. The doctors came in, and while they still looked worried, they spoke with a note of cautious optimism. There's been some improvement, they said. It's not much, but it's a start. The mother held her breath, fighting back tears of relief. It wasn't a full recovery, and it wasn't the miracle she had prayed for, but it was something. It was a sign that perhaps, just perhaps, her prayers were being heard. With that small sign of progress, her faith grew. Each day, as she continued to pray, the signs of improvement grew too. The child's color returned, a slight flush on her cheeks, a softness in her features that hadn't been there before. She still wasn't out of danger, but now, the mother had something to hold on to. Hope, faith, and the knowledge that her prayers were being answered, even if in small, quiet ways. Part 3. Miraculous signs of hope. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one stretching into the next. And yet, in the quiet of those long hours, the mother found a peace she had not known before. The fear that once gripped her heart had not disappeared completely, but it had softened. She could feel the gentle touch of God's presence in the room, like a steady, unwavering hand guiding her through the storm. Her child, though still fragile and sick, seemed to be responding to the prayers. It wasn't the instantaneous miracle she had imagined, but there were small changes, changes that were enough to keep her going, enough to give her hope. Each morning, she arrived at the hospital before the sun had fully risen, her eyes still heavy with the exhaustion of sleepless nights, but her heart filled with purpose. The nurses greeted her with a soft smile, one that conveyed a sense of solidarity in the fight. They were seeing improvements too, albeit small ones. Her child's vitals were becoming more stable. The swelling in her face had begun to go down, and the fever that had once burned so fiercely now seemed to dissipate. Little by little, as the days passed, the mother's prayers became more specific. She began to pray not only for her child's recovery, but for the strength to endure the long, painful wait. She prayed for wisdom, for guidance, and for the peace to trust that God's will would be done. There were moments when her faith wavered, when doubt crept in and tried to overshadow the hope she had worked so hard to cultivate. But every time she prayed, the strength returned. Every time she spoke to God, the reassurance came again, like a gentle breeze calming a stormy sea. One day, as she sat beside her child's bed, her hand resting on her daughter's small arm, something incredible happened. It was so subtle at first that she almost missed it, but then she saw it. The child's fingers twitched ever so slightly. The mother's breath caught in her throat. Was it a sign? Was her child waking up from the long, dark sleep that had kept her trapped in the grip of illness? The mother leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes never leaving her child's hand. Slowly, the small fingers curled, then relaxed, and then, with a gentle shift, her child's eyes fluttered open. The first thing the mother saw were the bright, wide eyes of her daughter, staring back at her. For the first time in days, the child was awake, and there was a spark in her eyes. The mother's heart soared as she watched her child's gaze shift, her small lips curling into a faint but unmistakable smile. It was a smile that spoke volumes, one of recognition, one of connection, one of hope. And in that moment, the mother knew. She knew that this was not just a simple sign of improvement. This was a miracle. The doctors came in shortly afterward, their faces filled with cautious optimism. They, too, saw the change. Her child's recovery was still far from guaranteed, but the signs were there. The tests, the numbers, the vital signs, they were all pointing in the right direction. Slowly but surely, her child was beginning to heal. The mother's prayers were being answered, not in the way she had imagined, but in the most profound way imaginable. Each day after that, the signs of healing continued. The child's strength grew. She was able to sit up in bed with assistance, her body no longer so frail, her cheeks flushed with life. The once lifeless, still child now began to move, to speak softly, to respond to her mother's voice. The mother's heart swelled with gratitude as she watched her child regain her vitality, each small victory a triumph. Every time her child smiled, every time her voice grew stronger, it was as if the mother's heart was being healed too, as if the very act of seeing her child recover was an answer to the deepest prayers she had whispered. That it was as though the world outside the hospital had faded into the background. The mother no longer felt trapped by the walls of uncertainty. She felt like she was moving through a fog that had begun to lift. There was a light now, a real light, at the end of the tunnel. The hospital room, once so cold and foreign, now felt like a place of renewal, a place of hope. But the mother knew that this was only the beginning. The road to full recovery would still be long, and there were many obstacles to overcome. Yet, she also knew that each day was a day closer to healing, a day closer to the miracle she had so fervently prayed for. Her faith had carried her this far, and it would continue to carry her forward. She prayed with renewed fervor, giving thanks for each sign, for each moment of progress. As the weeks went on, the recovery process was slow but steady. There were still moments of uncertainty, times when the mother would look at her child and wonder if this would last, if the illness would return. But with every passing day, her child grew stronger, the disease fading into the background, and the promise of a bright future began to emerge once more. The mother couldn't help but marvel at the transformation, at how a simple prayer, a plea from the deepest corners of her soul, had brought about this miraculous change. And though the road ahead was not without its challenges, the mother knew that she was not walking it alone. God had been with her every step of the way, and she would continue to trust, continue to pray, and continue to believe that her child was being healed, little by little, miracle by miracle. Part 4. Full recovery and gratitude. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. What had once been a terrifying ordeal now seemed like a distant memory, yet the mother knew she would never forget the journey she had walked. The journey that began with uncertainty, fear, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness had led her to this moment. A moment of pure gratitude, a moment where she could finally breathe again, knowing her child was on the path to complete recovery. Every morning, the mother woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. Her child was no longer the fragile, sickly figure lying motionless in a hospital bed. Now, she was a lively, vibrant young girl, full of energy and joy. The transition had been gradual, each day bringing new improvements, new signs that the healing process was working. But it wasn't just the medical improvements that filled the mother with gratitude. It was the emotional and spiritual healing that had taken place as well. She remembered the fear that had once gripped her heart, the overwhelming sense of doom and helplessness that had seemed all-consuming. But now, as she looked at her child, she saw the result of not just the doctor's expertise, but also the power of faith, prayer, and the unwavering love between them. The child's recovery had been a miracle that couldn't be explained solely by medicine. It was the culmination of her belief, her faith in God, and her endless hope that had carried her through the darkest days. The mother couldn't help but smile as she watched her daughter run around the garden outside their home, her laughter ringing through the air. She had come so far far beyond the sickly child who had once lay silent in a hospital room, far beyond the fear and uncertainty. The child's energy was infectious, filling every corner of their home with the lightness of life. The mother's heart swelled with joy, knowing that her prayers had been answered, her faith had been rewarded, and her child was whole again. There were still follow-up appointments, still the need for regular checkups, but the doctors had been amazed by the progress her child had made. They marveled at how quickly she had healed, how she had gone from being on the brink of death to now being a healthy, strong little girl. They still couldn't explain it fully, but they knew one thing for sure. The miracle of healing had taken place, and they had witnessed it firsthand. The mother often found herself sitting quietly, reflecting on the journey she had been on. She thought back to the hospital room, to the days of sleepless nights, to the times when her heart had ached with the weight of fear. And she thought about the prayers, the simple, heartfelt prayers she had whispered in desperation, asking for God's help. Each prayer had been an offering, a surrender of her deepest fears, and a trust in something greater than herself. And each prayer had been answered in its own time, in its own way. There were moments, too, when the mother would think back on her doubt, the uncertainty that had crept into her heart when she wasn't sure if her prayers would be answered. But looking at her child now, healthy, happy, and full of life, she understood. She understood that the journey was never just about the destination, but about the transformation that had taken place along the way. It was the faith she had gained, the peace she had found, and the relationship with God that had deepened through her prayers on one particular evening. As the mother sat by the window, watching the sun set over the horizon, she felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. She had made it through the hardest part of the journey. Her child was healthy, and their family was stronger than ever. She felt as though she had been given a second chance to live with gratitude, to cherish every moment, and to never take anything for granted again. Her faith had brought her this far, and she knew it would continue to guide her in every aspect of her life. The family gathered together that evening to celebrate not just the child's recovery, but the journey they had all been on. There was no grand celebration, just a quiet dinner around the table, filled with laughter and love. It was a celebration of life, of health, and of the unbreakable bond between them. The mother looked around at her family, her heart full of love and gratitude. She knew that this miracle was not just for her, it was for all of them. It was a reminder of the power of prayer, the power of faith, and the beauty of life itself. The child, now running around the house with boundless energy, stopped for a moment and looked up at her mother. She smiled brightly, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Mom, guess what?" she said, her voice filled with excitement. The mother smiled back, her heart overflowing. "What, sweetheart? I'm going to be okay, right? You told me I'd be okay, and now I'm better. I can run and play and do everything again." The mother's heart swelled with emotion as she knelt down to her child's level. "Yes, you're going to be okay. You're more than okay, sweetheart. You're better than ever. You've been healed, and we are so grateful." The little girl hugged her tightly, and the mother held her in her arms, feeling the warmth and strength of her child's body. It was a moment of pure joy, a moment that felt like the culmination of every prayer, every moment of faith, every tear that had been shed in the quiet hospital room. And in that moment, the mother knew. She knew that her faith had made all the difference. It had been the light in the darkness, the hope when there had been none. It had been the strength when she had felt weak, the peace when there had been only turmoil. And now, as she held her child in her arms, she knew that her prayers had not only brought her child back to health, they had brought her family closer together, stronger than ever before. Prompt for Leonardo AI image generation. A heartwarming image of a mother kneeling and embracing her fully recovered child in their home. The child is smiling brightly, full of energy, while the mother is overwhelmed with joy and gratitude. They are surrounded by a cozy, well-lit home, with family pictures on the walls and a sense of love filling the room. The background reflects warmth and comfort, symbolizing the healing process and the family's bond. The scene is captured in a 9:16 vertical format,